You can talk about people trying to be at the intersection of doing academic research and being engaged in the real world. Well, okay, here we got this senior professor at Howard, who is also chief economist for the AFL-CIO. So he spends his days fighting for the well-being of workers, and he does it from a foundation as a researcher. And I don't know if there's a lot of people you can say that about, but here we have it. Now, about a year ago, Bill and I were on an email exchange. There was so that Bob has since left, so that Bob can affirm what I'm about to tell you is true. So, for those who read the financial press, it looks like a lot of us do. There was a persistent rumor lists of candidates that were going to be filled by President Biden for the open Federal Reserve, and one of the two or three candidates over and over and over again was going to be appointed to the Fed. Bob Kuttner wrote something about it in his daily blogs about how significant this would be for Bill to be appointed. I myself thought that Bob understated the case. I told him so. I said this would actually be transformative to have some of Bill's stature, accomplishments, principled action said, and I still hold to that. And it's unfortunate that for whatever reasons, Biden got cold feet and Bill did not make it onto the Fed, but he's still doing outstanding work at the AFL-CIO and at Howard, and as a commentator, including having just meeting at the Board of Governors yesterday on a labor perspective on Fed policy. And one of the things that I said, and I think you were part of this part of the email exchange, Bill, it was between me and Bob. Things I said that I was so excited about the prospect of Bill actually getting onto the Fed was that not only was he an accomplished economist, not only did he represent the side of things, but this was a person of deep principles who stood up for what he knew was true and who was not shy about it. And so I don't know if you even remember this. I'm going to tell one anecdote about Bill at an ASSA meeting 25 years ago. Yeah, it was because it was around NAFTA. So there was a session on NAFTA that I think James Robson was giving his, his general equilibrium model on how NAFTA was going to expand job opportunities. Those were just implausible. Bill was absolutely, these things are generally polite. Ours is fairly polite, I'd say, but everyone tries to mostly say nice things. Well, Bill actually just laid into Robinson. I've never seen anything like it. Absolutely insisting that, the assumptions you completely doing this, and sure that all of us in the audience knew that this projection as to the benefits of NAFTA for the well-being of working people in the United States had no credence whatsoever. Even if this was a model that the Clinton administration was using and so forth. I'll never forget that that this rule showed not only someone who knew what he was talking about, but who was willing to stand up for it in the most awkward situations. So yes, had we gotten the Fed, we might not even be at this conference right now. But we're happy to have done the conference and very happy to have you here to be our last speaker, Spriggs.
Thank you so much, Bob. I don't know how to even follow that. Fortunately, I'm older, so my temper has gotten longer. I still don't like fools. So I think I've become better at handling them, I think. But yeah, I think the Fed wouldn't have liked it. So I want to thank you and Jerry for putting together a wonderful conference. I do apologize. I couldn't be here yesterday, as you mentioned. We had a meeting yesterday, the Executive Council of the AFL-CIO, 11 of the presidents of our affiliate unions and the president of our Minnesota State Fed, who serves on the Executive Council, with President Liz Schuler and Secretary Treasurer Fred Redmond. And I had organized these in the past when Janet Yellen was the chair. They fell off after President Trump had died and we got into the middle of COVID. But the meetings are important because it puts before the governors the actual voices of the real people who have to bargain these agreements. And they got to hear a mouthful. So I apologized because I had accepted this to be here for 2 days, but it's so hard to coordinate calendars that that meeting had to take precedent. And it emphasized for the Board of Governors the deep complexities that we are facing right now and the rather implausible position that the Fed has taken. And they got to hear it straight from the people who lead America's workers. So I want to echo everything that I've heard so far. I am so appreciative that the groundwork for what I'm going to say has already been laid, because I agree with all of the papers that have been presented. I just want to crystallize what's been said to give my view of what I think the Fed ought to be doing in this situation. And I obviously think they're not doing that right. So I'm going to hark back to Bob's presentation yesterday that I missed, and I'm sorry I missed it, but you know, he went through a deep analysis of where did this 2% target come from. I want to take it a more generic step. So I'm not saying anything different than what he said, except to even ask a question about, did it change? Yes, it did. Okay. Why even price stability? You know, a lot of the argument that we're fighting against is this idea that price stability, yes, and then everything else falls into place. That's how it is presented to us. So often in economics, we have been caught up now in, you have to show me some identification so you can give me causality. We've gone deep in that direction. We forget sometimes, no, first you even have to show me correlation. Like, not even the step with the causality, just show me correlation. It's like, well, we can have rising wages and we can have rising living standards with no unions. Okay, so show me a correlation, not causation, just correlation. Show me a place with low union density, no bargaining power, and rising wages and rising living standards. Well, you know, you can say, well, unions don't cause that, but you can't show me the counterfactual. There's no correlation that holds that up, right? So sometimes we have gotten too far on the way end of forgetting that you got to show me correlation. So why price stability? So we can see before the Great Moderation that there was greater variation in prices, that inflation was slightly higher during that period, that we didn't have tight monitoring of price variation. And we can show that, yes, this is price moderation in that we have slightly lower inflation and there's much less variation in it. Okay, these are the two time periods. So what is it correlate it with? Does it go with something good? Whether it's causal or not, just does it go with something good? Well, here we have labor market stability, and we can see that, in fact, unemployment averages much higher, that the variation in unemployment is slightly bigger, and we have spent many more months, a much higher share of months that were above 6%. I have it in the good sense, were you below 6%? But we have spent far less time below 6% under this price moderation. So not an argument about causality, but just the correlation, the argument that price stability gets me something better for workers. Okay, but that's not correlated with getting something better for workers. So this isn't telling me that price stability is all that in a bag of chips, because that's not how it's turned out. We do know that higher unemployment rate and the greater variation and the less time that we have spent anywhere near what you might call full employment is correlated with this gap between what do workers make and what do they produce. It is correlated with that. Again, not causation, but it is correlated with that. And greater price variation, less price stability is correlated with prices rising with productivity. So telling me that price stability is nirvana just doesn't work out. It's not the way it works. What happens with this problem we've had when we are worried about price stability and this gap that is associated with workers not seeing their wages rise with productivity? Now, part of that, you saw from Jay's paper, part of this we all know is you have fewer unions, you have lower minimum wages, and there are a whole other set of attacks on workers that we can list. I would argue because they are more possible when you have higher unemployment. When you have workers sitting out desperate for jobs, all of those things are possible. It is easier to attack a union. It is easier to say, if you go on strike, I will permanently replace you if the unemployment rate is 10%. It is easier for workers to say, yes, you've not raised the minimum wage in 20 years, but I'll take the job anyway. It is easier to do all that when you put workers under the pressure. There are no jobs. Jobs will be scarce. These are easier to accomplish. So there are other things. So again, the issue about causation, but there are other things correlated with higher unemployment that make these other things possible. But what else is possible? And how did we keep the economy together is the question we often don't ask. So workers weren't making more money. They were making more stuff. So why weren't they unemployed? Say's law, right? You got to go buy the stuff in order to have the jobs. So the red line is the growth of consumer debt. That blue line, it's on the other axis, but you can see they grow together. The blue line is the gap. So there you have it. If you're making more stuff, but you're not making more money, it means you must be borrowing to buy the stuff. That's just how it has to work. That's just the arithmetic in order to keep everybody employed. And so it seems to be that tracks the growth of finance and insurance and value added in GDP as well. Somebody borrowing money is somebody's wealth, which means that some industry has to handle all of this, and presto, it's getting bigger. It's all correlated. And then let's look at that gap in productivity. That's the blue and red graph is the productivity wage gap. But this other graph is fascinating because that's the gap between wages in the financial sector and everybody else. So again, not causation, but it's clearly correlated that that gap generates debt, generates wealth for somebody else, generates an industry where a lot of people are getting a lot of money if they're in the 1% in that industry. How does the Fed then pretend that interest rates matter? Because now it matters for consumption, because this is how people are consuming. They're consuming off the debt. We get this one little bright moment, people have savings and debt has fallen to a record low level. Delinquencies on credit cards is record low level. Delinquencies on all debts are record low levels. We're actually at the economy you would want. Complaint, complaint, complaint. Larry Summers is complaining. Oh, people have too much money. Jason Furman is complaining. You gave people too much money. They have too much savings. They're making too much money. Oh my goodness, they're not going into debt. Who, after 2 years where we destroyed the labor market, took away people's income, would complain that 2 years later, you return to the same share of employment to population ratio, higher wages, fewer people in low wage jobs, lowest level of household debt. Who then complains? Why is this bad? Who could say this is bad? We've never had a return to normalcy from a worker's perspective in 2 years. It never happened. Normalcy in a better sense, because actually now households are where you would want them to be in the first place, to be resilient. They have the savings, they have better liquidity, but we got the complaints. The problem with this giant increase in inequality is that it creates a less stable economy. When you have greater inequality, you have less stability. So the correlation of price stability with things is not to good things. Higher inequality, which is correlated with less economic stability, which is correlated with greater debt, which is correlated with workers living with wages that don't sustain the economy. So why do we want price stability? I mean, I'm with Bob. Why do you want 2% inflation as a target? But why do you want it anyway? What is it that it's correlated with that you can tell me something good happens? Now, the other problem is prices aren't well predicted. I'm taking this from some work that Kristen Forbes did. And what she has charted out is this path of the great moderation. And she's looking at the issue of whether the economy runs too hot, just right, or too cold. And you can see that since the Great Recession, our problem has been much more towards too cold, and that prior to the Great Recession, we were going towards the just right, almost too cold, but clearly we're in this too cold. Now we have this phase where prices suddenly are high, but she also asked this other question, which is, how well do central banks get these targets? And so she's charted out how often they've let their economy be too hot, which includes this before the Great Moderation. Since the Great Moderation, look at the share of central banks that tend to get the economy wrong because of shocks. Often they do let the economy overheat. We see a couple of spells of that. But the biggest thing they do is they get it wrong. The economy is too cool. And the cost of it being too cool are exceedingly high. Now, again, this is just their framework. The other problem they have is this, and that is increasingly we are in a global world. The shocks aren't just to one economy. They are global phenomena. And what happens is a shock that then reverberates through every economy. So I was really happy about your paper, because the biggest thing that has made me just go bonkers. I'm a big science fiction fan. So, you know, all those science fiction movies where the aliens come to attack Earth, and it's aliens, not these xenophobic Nazis who complain about people from other countries. Aliens to Earth come to attack human beings, us as human beings. And in the movie, it's us human beings who have to come to the challenge and realize that we're all on this one little dot in the universe, and we have to pull together. And so here we get a virus, which technically is not a living being, which is attacking all human beings all around the globe. This is a one moment, you think, where we would go, yes, because we're not talking about killing somebody, because it's a virus, it's a thing. We only have to unite on killing a thing to prevent it from killing us. Could we do it? No, we utterly failed. But economists failed bigger than anybody else, in my estimation. Why? Because it is an actual war. And we willingly kind of took a back step to the health experts. Thank goodness, because economists would have gotten it wrong. And we said, we can't meet in big groups like this. This is not safe. And so we let the health experts tell us, restaurants getting together? No. Going to a concert? No. Going to the gym? No. Great, hooray. And one thing we economists did was show that saved lives. We saved lives. Just as if you're in a war, you have to save lives. What we did not do is say, so you are deliberately constraining demand. You are saying you cannot go to the mall, but you can go to Amazon. You cannot go to a sit-down restaurant, but you can order the pizza you were always ordering online. You cannot go to the gym, but you can buy a Peloton in your house. And no economist stepped in and said, you know, this is just like a war. Because we were also saying, we don't have enough respiratory devices. We don't have enough ventilators. We don't have enough masks. And we went through all the things under a war production you would have to have. And instead of economists saying, this is a war, and what did we do in World War II? We understood we're blowing up the market. We don't want the market. This is the wrong time to want the market, because the market is going to go bazooka crazy and we can't control it. And you're going to get all sorts of weird effects, because this is a moment we want to direct the market. We want to reallocate people quickly. We can't wait for the market to reallocate people to make masks. We can't wait for the market to reallocate people to make ventilators. We can't wait for the market to deliver us nursing. We didn't say, you're about to deplete our entire nursing workforce. If it's war, right, you know, unfortunately, you're going to run out of soldiers. You got to draft some people, and you're going to have to train them so they can go to war. What do we say? Well, yeah, nurses are getting really sick. Yeah, they're getting the virus at a disproportionate rate. Yeah, they're dying at a really high rate. That was our reaction. No economist stepped in and said, let's get the corollaries here. You need more troops. You have to be figuring out how to train the troops. You need to ramp this up now, not 5 years as it might take the market to react. Now the market is reacting because after you killed all the nurses, after you ran them all out, we don't have any nurses. There's a nursing shortage. What are we going to do? It's causing inflation. It's horrible. Like somebody with 3 ounces of common sense couldn't have seen this. An economist of all who think that they know everything couldn't have seen this is going to be an issue. You cannot rely on the market. And, oh, you mean the price of Pelotons are going up? Bob and I were talking about this. If you wrote an Econ 1 exam, right, and you said you cannot go to the gym, no one can go to the gym, what will happen to the price of Pelotons, right? But one of your students said, nothing. What does that have to do when you closed every gym in the country? How is that related to Pelotons? You would go, ooh, right? And then after we get out of that, people want more goods than services. Really? You're shocked. Now, it really was a war. We lost 1 million Americans. Understand in World War II, we did not lose 1 million soldiers in a 5-year battle against the 2 most powerful armies we have seen at that point to history. We didn't lose 1 million of them. We lost 1 million Americans, 1 million. And it's counting bigger as we continue to ignore, we are still in a war against this virus. The war isn't, I mean, I know the president took a victory lap and said that it's behind us, but people are still getting sick and people are still dying. It may be at a rate we've now normalized, unfortunately, because we've lost our vision that this is humans versus a virus. And for whatever reason, we don't have the patience. This has not been 5 years. We fought Nazi Germany for 5 years. Have mercy if these people were in charge in 1941. Oh, we haven't beat Hitler yet. Well, I guess we got to go home. Time out. You know, what did we do to markets, though? We understood you cannot just let prices go wherever they want to go, because we are deliberately in the need of directing the market. We need to have wage price controls. We need to have a board. This is what the lesson from World War II was. The lesson to the central bank at the time was stand down. We are in a war. The point is we win the war. You worry about anything else later, because if we don't win the war, whatever it is you're doing is irrelevant. Now, in the midst of the war against the virus, which we haven't won, we're still fighting it. It is still causing disruptions. We still have more sick days today than we did pre-COVID. And again, people are still dying. So we should never lose track of that. On top of that, Russia decides it wants to flex its muscle, and Putin wants to declare himself dictator of the universe and invades Ukraine. The world eats 2 major grains, wheat and rice. The 3 major wheat producers, the United States of America, Russia, Ukraine. You're going to take 2 of the biggest wheat producers out, and then you are going to say, oh, food price is going to stay constant. Like, on what planet? I mean, again, this is an Econ 1 question. If you said to your students, Saudi Arabia is not producing any more oil, Israel is not producing oil, Nigeria is not producing oil, what will happen to the price of oil? And if the answer is, I don't know, it's like, look. Now, in response to taking the Ukraine out, and again, the Fed makes me ballistic, the biggest statistical agency in the United States is the U.S. Department of Agriculture. I was really shocked when I was in the government this, because I sat on this committee with all the other assistant secretaries for policy. We were talking about our statistical agencies, and I was just dumbfounded that the statistical agency at agriculture dwarfs the Census Bureau plus the BLS, dwarfs them. They're tiny little things. They're like an office in USDA. USDA puts out a very detailed report on world agricultural production. Very detailed. So if you look at their last report, they have satellite pictures. This is how serious they are. They have satellite pictures of Ukrainian farms to supplement how they can estimate what's happening to wheat production in Ukraine. That's how serious this statistical agency takes its stuff. Now, how did we survive as it was? Turns out, because wheat is so important to human consumption, we took away acres under cultivation in other grains in order to get wheat production up. So the response from farmers was rather quickly, price of wheat is going up. I'm not growing barley. I'm not growing alfalfa. I'm growing wheat. But the reason I wasn't growing wheat on that land is because the yield is going to be lower, which is why I'm growing alfalfa and barley. So we got wheat production to not fall, miracle upon miracle, but only through lower yield land, which means the price of wheat is still going to go up because it's less productive land making up for the loss in Ukraine. But what do we do with alfalfa? Where do these other greens go? They go to animals. So again, Econ 1, we are growing less hay and alfalfa and oats. What's going to happen to the price of meat? And then we don't get to have a discussion about global warming, which also affected yield rates, even among lands that were the most productive for wheat. And what is global warming doing? Well, there's a huge drought in this country called China. And if you have a drought, rice needs water. Those two don't go together. So grain production, rice production in China has been falling. Then we had a tremendous typhoon that attacked Pakistan, which grows rice. Now, rice needs water, but it doesn't need typhoons. And so rice production was down. And so this year we actually had a drop in grain production. These are huge disruptions. The war, an ability to discuss global warming, an ability to discuss other disruptions. This is why Isabella's paper is so key for my thinking. Going forward, we are enduring right now what global warming threats are. They are real. We are experiencing them now. But we economists are so hung up in prices go up. This has to be labeled inflation. So then we have to talk about inflation. Okay, Mrs. Lincoln, but what did you think of the play? How are we discussing anything other than you're still losing people to the pandemic? We still have this horrible war, and we have global warming, and it's real. The Mississippi River is drying up. Literally drying up. Parts of it are not navigable. Unless something changes very quickly, larger parts of it will be non-navigable. How do you get the grain from the United States to the world? The Mississippi River. We can't put rail cars to do that because they aren't doing that. The trains that go from Wyoming east are carrying coal. They're not prepared to pick up all of that wheat, all that corn. We aren't prepared for Europe to have no corn production. Temperatures above 90 degrees kill corn. It's a self-fertilizing plant from its tassels. Temperatures go above 90 degrees, that fertilization doesn't happen. The pictures that they had in the World Report just showed you these shriveled up ears of corn in Europe from that heat wave. Another heat wave, another spell of no corn. We have to take these challenges seriously. We really could not produce chips. We couldn't put them in our cars. We literally warehoused tens of thousands of cars in Detroit because they were waiting for chips. We explained to the Federal Reserve from our utilities unions, another hurricane happens, we have a big problem because we literally don't have poles. The poles for the utilities, we don't have them. They're in shortage. This is a global problem. There are no poles. Transformers, let me wrap up. Transformers right now, because the Russians are attacking the electric grid for the Ukraine, transformers don't exist. Another storm, and we're literally in the United States going to be, well, some of you aren't going to get your electricity for quite a while. This is going to take us time to get the transformers or the poles. We're going to have to pick and choose who gets electricity. All of this to say, in this world of uncertainty, why would you want to stabilize prices when you know you can't? Why would you want to do something you know you can't do? And why would you want to tell industries the solution for this is we want price stability, and that means I want to kill demand. So what I want to say to the utility companies right now, you don't have poles, you don't have transformers, so my solution for you, you don't have demand. Solved it for you. Nobody's getting electricity because they don't want to demand it. So now you don't have to worry about the poles, you don't have to worry about the transformers. Done. This is the wrong solution. And so, to me, it is far better for the Fed to say to people and industry, you have a challenge ahead of you. You're going to have to figure it out. It's not going to be an easy road. And we want you to do it so that we have a green economy coming out of it. You need to be able to make investments to make the green economy happen because we don't have any more time. We can't go without food. That's real now. The threat to food is now, not 10 years as like environmentalists want to tell you you're going to become nothing but cockroaches on the earth. Now we can't produce food for human beings because of global warming and our stupidity of fighting each other. So we have to have an emergency plan. We, as economists, have to tell people markets cannot distribute goods if you're going to blow up markets. Do not think that prices are going to be okay. They cannot be. By definition, the way the market allocates goods, prices are going to get bid up. Rich countries will bid against poor countries in order to get these resources. This is happening now. This is not forward. So we want you to have solutions, but how do I assure, how do I assure that? I assure it by assuring you that I am keeping to full employment. I want workers reallocated. The market can do that at full employment. It really can't do that if you disrupt markets with unemployment. I will monitor prices, but I can't control those. And using demand to shrink the economy gets in the way of us adapting. And we're going to have controls against speculation in food and options markets, against fuel and options markets. We will have to monitor against price gouging, just like you would if there were a hurricane, just like you would if somebody wiped out Southern Florida. We don't let people price gouge on water. you don't want to price gouge on food. We can't let that happen. We economists have to lead. We have to provide the world with there's no Santa Claus, there's no fairy tale land. If you disrupt markets and you continue to want to believe in markets, they're going to give you answers you don't like. They're going to give you high prices in all sorts of places, and we can't predict all of them, and there's no way for us to monitor all of them. You're going to get higher prices grow up. Let us at least help people who need the help, those who have low incomes who won't be able to navigate us. We need the fiscal space to do that, and we're going to allow the fiscal space so you can help the people who are hurt by these high prices. We're going to allow companies with the liquidity so that you can find the other resources, so you can invest in making sure supply chains are going to be there. And we're going to do that by assuring that the one thing we can count on, you can't count on prices, but you can count on, we're going to make sure everybody is working to these solutions. Because we need all hands on deck. Everybody is valuable in this war against climate, against evil, and against this stupid virus.
Thank you. And thank you so much, Bill. That was really great. I have a question that I think I've been thinking about the last couple of days is that people care about inflation. So you ask why price stability, and I agree with you on substance, but we know people really care a lot about inflation. I'm thinking of the Bob Schiller paper that I think Josh Bivens brought up a year ago, and I now talk about in casual conversation once a week, that like people just, they do care a lot. And I think, you know, this is partly prices seem like they just come from above and it's an injustice when they go up a lot versus if you lose your job, even in a recession, or if you have low wages, even under monopsony, you can internalize that a little bit more. And so how do we change that attitude? Do we need to change that attitude? Maybe the Fed just acts on the principle of full employment anyway, and that can lead that change in attitude. I just think that's like a big constraint to a lot of what everyone has been talking about the past 2 days is that people care.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for a fantastic talk. We clearly share a vision. So how to get there? That is my question, how to get there? And what to do politically? Like if this is the scenario, what is to be done?
Anybody else have a question or a comment? Okay, it gets back to you, Bill.
So this is what.
So we are.
Mhm.
So Bill, of course, and then everybody can contribute.
So this is why I'm angry at the Fed, because their ability as being given all mantle of you are independent economic thinkers is their biggest role is to educate people, which in August of 2020 and then his speech to the Fed at Grand Teton Lodge, that's what Jay Powell did. He explained this scenario to people, but instead he, in my view, was bullied by the people that Jamie identified into being defensive. Why should one believe that I can't get chips for 3 months is the end of transitory? Just because we haven't experienced a disruption in production that is long-term doesn't mean that's not possible. And Jay, in my view, let himself be bullied away from transitory and being told, well, transitory has to be 3 weeks. You know, it's more than 3 weeks. Well, yes, we had a strike against General Motors. General Motors forced their strike on the UAW in October of 2019 before COVID. I have to explain that to you. If you look at a map, if you look at a graph of US auto production, because you see it dip just a little bit, and you're like, why did it dip a little bit? That was the strike. If I show you we didn't have chips in any auto factory, it's down here. Yeah, I don't have to explain it to you. You know, it was there, and it was there for many months. We as economists have to do a better job. It's the expectations, I think, Kay. It's the expectations, and it's the way you explain it to people. Because suddenly you had the Fed and the vaunted Larry Summers telling everybody it's because you got too much money, because there was too much from the federal government and all this kind of stuff. And so their expectation was, this is something you can do about. You can do it now. You have the power of Federal Reserve to control this. And you didn't have the strong voice from the Fed saying, folks, this needs some calm level thinking. We can't control the drought in China. We can't lower temperatures in Europe. We can't solve the drought for our farmers. If we have these supply shocks, prices will go up. It's tempering expectations. The Fed talks about expectations all the time, but they have to temper these expectations, and they have to help us understand what are real solutions. So of course I'm going to be upset if you tell me there's that Joe Biden, it's that Federal Reserve, they printed all that money in 2020. It was quantitative easing, all of that. That's why the price of corn is high. And so of course, people are going to be upset. I'd be upset too. I'm not upset about the prices, but when you say those things, you preclude, when you say it's demand, as Larry Summers has pointed out, those of us who say, well, why don't we index SNAP benefits? Understanding that we're going to have this crisis for a little while, why don't we raise SNAP benefits, because we know it's reaching deeper into the wage distribution of those who can adjust to these food prices, and we're going to index them so that they will cover the food prices. You can't do it because now everybody in Congress, believe me, you know this because you're there. If you propose that to Congress right now, you get the usual votes from our usual progressive friends, and nobody else would agree with you. And they would even be afraid of bringing it up because they know they'd be laughed out the room. This is the problem. So these shocks, we have to have the fiscal that we accept that you got to have fiscal space to respond when there's a hurricane that wipes out, 30 cities in Florida. We don't think they're going to magically rebuild, but people think they're going to come and start rebuilding. And so my answer is, you show people that you get it. This is pain. We do know how to relieve that pain. We do know how to get households the money so that they can navigate this. They wanted to deal with this contradiction between the European Central Bank saying it wanted to tighten demand, but at the same time, they were quite aggressive about how do we get fuel subsidies in Germany, this complex formula of how we can help families negotiate these fuel prices, and how can we help lower income families with food. We couldn't do that in the US because that was off limits. All the criticism was that more demand, that will raise inflation, because we're still calling this inflation, and we're still unwilling to get everybody on board and unify us in purpose. It's amazing we still can't unify the American people in the face of COVID, and every American who's over 50 knows to hate Russia instinctively. And we can't unite Americans against these two things speaks volumes to us. But as economists, this ought to be one thing where we can contribute to uniting people and uniting people against global warming. and saying, we're serious, you got to fight global warming. The threat is now to us having food. And economists are still off debating, this is inflationary, and the way to control inflation is it demand, is it supply? We're still, we can't get to a world level standing, and it's frightening because it's a world level standing in the case of global warming and the virus. This is not go out and kill humans. This is go out and unify humans. And we economists we're so atomistic in our training that we can't join humans together. We can't give a lesson on human unity in the face of what now are true existential threats to humans, not Americans, not Russians, not Ukrainians, to humans.
All right. Oh, did you have a question? Okay.
I think we might have two questions.
So I really liked what you were saying earlier about inequality inflation. And Robert Frank and others have advanced this idea of a progressive consumption tax as an alternative to raising interest rates and using that fiscal space to help meet needs for necessities. Yet I haven't seen much take up or much discussion of that idea. Is that what's happening with that? Is that something that could fly?
Before you answer that, we have one final question.
Hi, Mark Satterfield from the New School. I just want to pick up on the people care about inflation topic. I mean, it seems to me that they do, but in a textbook sense, inflation is an equal proportional rise in all prices. In a practical case, it never is. It's a messy series of relative price changes. So to sort of paraphrase a former president, it's the redistribution stupid. So on that basis, it seems to me that democratic policymakers could and should have owned the environment over the last year or two, because it's the redistribution stupid, not inflation per se. So I'm wondering if you have any insights as to why they haven't, why they've actually, if anything, run away from it instead of run toward the issue by reframing it for what it is in terms of essentially redistribution that is adverse to labor rather than a textbook inflation.
Well, and answer that question in fairness, a very progressive Green Act went through the House. They didn't shy away from it. But for one politician in the Senate, they would have gotten the bigger vision. And they were selling the bigger vision of why we needed to act now, why we needed the bigger investment that was asked for in the House legislation. And they were leading with that. And so it's the unfortunate way that it played out, but it played out in large part because it was within the context of all these economists yelling and screaming about inflation, and this huge government program in the face of inflation was a stupid idea because it would make inflation worse. So this characterization from folks who were characterizing this moment as being driven by excess demand kills fiscal space and kills the ability to move the debate. And many people were therefore convinced that that act, rather than move us to the right point, was moving inflation up. And instead of thinking this is going to help us get food prices under control, they thought the other. And Nancy, I mean, that was something I proposed, and even Larry Summers said, yes, maybe after he realized he wasn't making sense, said, yes, we should probably do that. I mean, the gall of Larry and Jason was they pointed to what the fiscal policy was and ignored that the stock market had gone up enough to generate trillions of dollars to the top 5% from accumulated wealth. That was not inflationary. giving a child credit to some working mom, that's inflationary. So, I mean, there was a reality and, the paper on where does the oil surplus wealth go? To the top. So yes, there's every argument to say, if you want to make this neutral from a fiscal policy position, if you want to say, okay, I get it, but we still don't want demand to go crazy, then yes, most of the consumption in the United States happens at the top. The reality is that the top 10% consume as much as the bottom 40%. So if you're worried about this, the income gains that we have seen go to the top, much of this is from profiteering, from being able to price gouge. Where do those profits go? Whether it's oil and, the paper certainly suggested it, whether it's oil or something else, it goes to the wealthy. Then yes, if you worry about the fiscal fairness of it and you don't want to exacerbate things, in this moment, we should have a surcharge, just as we did with creating the income tax to do World War I and the surcharge we did to do World War II. We are in a war. Humans are in a war. People at the top who are gaining as they gained in World War II, because there are people who made mints of money providing the armaments. You gotta pay a tax for that. We gave you wealth. By fiat, we gave you wealth. By fiat, we're giving them wealth because we're not reining in their excesses, knowing that these shortages create huge opportunities for profiteering. And so, yeah, I think that you could say, let's tax it, but let's not put the onus on the Fed to kill the economy. If you're that worried about the excess demand, it's the people at the top.
All right.
Thank you so much, Bill. Didn't disappoint. Too bad you didn't get on the Fed, right? God, I think it would have actually truly been transformative if that one little thing had happened.